all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature Podcast, where every week, me and my co-host David try and find the perfect double feature for your viewing pleasure. I'm your host, Dean, joined by something to do with explosions. David, how are you?
Can we get a explosives check on set?
I don't think we have enough people on set to check explosions because this week, oh sweet Mary Mother of God, there's 45 minutes of unbroken explosion per movie.
Yeah. It's hard to put into words the amount of pyrotechnics one uses in two films about the same event, and how even still there is a massive difference between the two.
Yeah, these movies are probably the quintessential Pearl Harbor films.
Yeah, I would. I don't think there are very many. I would say that Pearl Harbor in itself is not a subgenre of war film, but it's certainly if you want to pick it apart, it's one of the like probably five major events you could make a movie about in World War II.
Yeah, and this week we're gonna actually talk about the two best known ones. What are those movies, David?
Right, we have first on the marquee, the Pearl Harbor film titled Pearl Harbor, by Michael Bay, very famous, from 2001, though quite not as critically acclaimed as Tora, 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 directed by a number of names, but a American-Japanese three-person tandem of Richard Fleischer, Fukasaku, pardon my French, and Toshio Masuda.
The original director for that one actually was also Akira Kurosawa. For
Really?
Yep, he was on Tora 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 as the main Japanese director,
Hmm.
and it went over budget, over time, and he got kicked from the project. And apparently, only 1 minute of footage that he directed made it into the final film.
Well, I'm going to want to talk more about that, but real quick, let's get to the log lines of these two movies.
What are these movies about? What's our elevator pitch for this week?
Righto, so Pearl Harbor, we have two ace flyboys fight over a field nurse as war with Japan tests their ability to think about their future. Tora, 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 the Japanese Naval Command takes advantage of a naive American administration to launch a sneak attack that triggers the Second World War.
Yeah, that's about the gist of both of these films.
Certainly, I mean, if you really wanted to really boil it down to the nuts and bolts, one is a war film with a love story, and one is about Pearl Harbor.
Hey, you just saved our audience, what is it, 5.5 collective hours of film?
Because that's the if you wanted to end the episode here right now.
That's the first point I want to make about these movies. These movies are so long. Oh my God, Pearl Harbor is 3 hours long. Oh my god.
Yeah,
I couldn't
and
look at
there's
Ben Affleck that much longer.
no Journey to Mordor in this one. It's just okay. So before we get into that, do we want to dive into Tora, which is kind of the better, in my opinion, straight off the bat, it's gonna be the better movie of the two.
I don't know. I don't know about that.
Or do we want to dive into Pearl Harbor, the massive Michael Bay mess that it is?
Well, okay. First, let's get the groundwork out of the way here for our, I guess, opening theme here. Did we
Yeah.
hit or miss on this double feature? Was this a
It's
good pairing?
okay. Yeah, that's a good point. It's a good pairing, I think. Certainly. I honestly did not think I would enjoy watching these two movies. The impetus for the episode is obviously that this will be released on Pearl Harbor Day, so what better way to hit the two Pearl Harbor movies than on the day itself? This is like Haley's Comet passing the double feature picture show. We don't know when we'll actually get a release day on Pearl Harbor Day ever again. Um, but yeah, I was kind of surprised with how much I was entertained by these two. Pearl Harbor, I enjoy all the stars in the movie. I'll give it that. I love a Jennifer Garner. Ben Affleck's entertaining in himself.
Josh Hartnett, what happened to
Yeah, his
him?
co-star with that unibrow is, but then not a unibrow in some scenes. It's kind of there and gone again the next day. Um, and of course the lovely Kate Beckinsale. All of them come together to make very charismatic roles.
And
But
then you have the masterful camera worker Tora, some
yes, and the
solid
quite
performances.
methodical telling of the political web.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of political characters in that film.
Very.
A lot of titling.
And we actually have a Navy officer who crosses both films as because he was a real person who appeared in both of these.
Mm.
But we'll get to that a little bit later because I want to make a note about him later on in the episode. But I guess let's just start off with this. So we're saying these movies were a hit. We actually got a pretty good double feature.
I'd say so.
All right.
I'd say it's you'd be hard pressed if this is the kind of film you're looking for. Find a better pairing for two films about Pearl Harbor.
All right. Then I guess let's get started. What works about both these movies? We'll start with the story. What worked about the story for Pearl Harbor and for Tora?
Okay, so this is actually where I start to really dig into positives and negatives. So it's very obvious that Pearl Harbor in itself is about Pearl Harbor, quote unquote. But really, what it's about is this story of two pilots that is kind of one aspect of the story of the event
Mm.
that has been stretched out into the entire event and kind of shoehorned in place of the actual thing. It's funny because these two pilots are mentioned in Tora during the climax of the film, during the attack. The two pilots that actually get into a plane in the latter half of the attack and then go up and fire down the Japanese pilots, those are the two that end up being in Pearl Harbor.
That fun fact, historically inaccurate. The United States
historically
Air
inaccurate,
Force
for sure.
never got a plane off the ground on the attacks in Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, but it's
know.
like the way that the two play out.
Oh yeah, it's very
pretty,
similar.
it's like a mirror of itself, I suppose.
My biggest thing with I guess Pearl Harbor and Tora in terms of like the story is one tries to be a very humanizing portrayal of these were the people at Pearl Harbor when the things happened, where we have, the love story, all the it's a very light and kind of happy atmosphere in Pearl Harbor for a lot of the movie, and then there's this weird love triangle, and it gets like, oh man, oh, the people we've been following for 2.5 hours, they're in the dirt, and now we got to figure this out. And with Tora, it's trying to be a more like historical reenactment of the events. If I'm kind of like that's Tora felt a lot more like almost like documentarian in a way.
Yeah, I think that reenactment was a really good word for it, and you can actually you could see some of the Pearl Harbor Memorial setup in some of the shots. I believe at one battleship that they're using, there's a bunch of like around the I don't know my ship terminology very well. Maybe that should have been the prep for the show, but
Yeah.
in the forward half of the ship, there's like this shade. Um, oh, I don't know what you call those tent. Yeah, it's like a shade tent set up on along that half of the ship, which looks like it looks like shading for tourists, but it's on the ship and then exploded when
Hmm.
they're just out there setting pyrotechnics next to these historical um, landmarks. I don't know what you would define a ship as, but
A Navy vessel with a shit ton of explosives on it? I don't know.
yeah, because that was one thing I was especially wondering about when watching Tora is okay. You have obviously in Pearl Harbor, a lot of these things were props that were then built on set by production designers and set designers and all these people, or CG'd in too. I'm sure there was some computer graphics used in order to make this happen.
Oddly enough, for Pearl Harbor, there are only 4 completely computer generated shots. Everything else is practical. That's the crazy thing. You find out that Michael Bay is really into practical explosions.
Oh, you didn't know? I mean, I would never have guessed that Michael Bay himself was the king of explosions in Hollywood. I don't think there's a person living that he would be able to rest without them knowing that. But yeah, I mean, he's the guy. I will admit he's also the right guy for that film. But the thing I was wondering about in Tora is like those were all real ships. So like,
Yeah.
were they ships that were just current U.S. Navy commissions? Were they recently out of commission? Were they the historical ship? I was wondering
Um
that all along.
Honestly, I wouldn't be completely sure cuz I'm pretty sure this was a joint Japanese and American production.
Right.
Um I'm at least I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Yeah, I
And
believe the Japanese production did all of like the Japanese spoken parts, and then the American director did all of the American parts, and they were edited together after the fact.
yeah, from my understanding, the boats that we see in the film, those are American. Yeah, all of them are American. I don't think there's any Japanese boats that are used, or any Japanese battleships that are used. And from my understanding, the boats were active duty
Hmm,
Navy ships. They were,
that's fascinating.
yeah. Well, it's one of those things. That's what's something a lot of people don't realize about the how like the United States government and the military work in like the film industry is so because technically your tax dollars pay for Navy ships and aircraft and helicopters and all that other stuff, you technically have the right to use them for your film. The
Really?
issue, yes, this is a real thing I learned in film school. The issue is you have to get approval by like the Pentagon and like national security and stuff like that because they can't just drop off a tank or a Navy ship to your film studio and let you use it.
There's that big government.
Yeah, you have to get approved by it and they send it out to you, but technically you use it for free. Like
Wow.
you don't pay for the I'm pretty sure you don't pay for the battleship or it's like dirt cheap.
So is that goes for anything that's publicly funded by tax dollars? Then
As far as I know, yeah. That's
that's
like the
interesting.
thing is public parks. A lot of times you need a permit and if you tell them you're doing it for like any educational purposes or you're in film school, it's free. They can't charge you for it unless you're trying to turn a profit off of it because then they have to close the park down. A lot of times for stuff like that, the reason you're paying is because they have to close off a section of it and they have to pay for somebody to be there to do it.
Fascinating.
Yeah. But the more you know. There's the more you know rainbow for those who can't see it. But yeah. But for Tor and Pearl Harbor, they did that. For Pearl Harbor, all the ships and planes, I'm pretty sure were all those were real. Everything we saw was real.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that was the same thing. Some of them were like antiques and they had to give them on loan, but you know, it happens. But yeah,
Yeah, because that was another thing I was noticing about all the Japanese Zeros, which they got some really great shots of the formations of those and like them flying through. Those are some of my favorite shots that were in either of the films, of the Zeros themselves. But two, it's like you also don't get those money shots of the planes being shot down in Tora Tora Tora. The closest we get is a plane flies down into one hangar, but it kind of just flies behind it, and then they cut to the explosion inside. But you get a great explosion from that, like a
yeah.
Michael Bay level explosion right there. But it's still the most we get is like they'll trail some smoke off the planes when they're fired at, quote unquote.
It's one of those things where Tora Tora Tora, you can tell this was made in 1970,
Oh yeah,
and they could not afford to crash airplanes. That was not in the budget. But yeah, but I think both of these do have a spectacle to them, because they're based off of Pearl Harbor, one of the most dramatic moments in U.S. history in terms
yeah.
of continental U.S. history. Um, yeah. Do you Where do you want to start with that? Because I don't know if these movies. I feel one is trying to be a very direct reenactment and telling of like the event of Pearl Harbor, and the other one's trying to be like Titanic.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right because you used a good word for both of these. Spectacle. These definitely feel like the respective times version of an event movie. Because obviously every other fucking movie that comes out nowadays is an event movie. It's
Yeah.
almost annoying how often movies are made to feel like you have to be there. Versus, this movie, it can be a little bit niche. It doesn't have to have sold, hundreds of millions of dollars. But, for a film, and unfortunately I did sneak a peek at the budgets of both of these
That's
because I
all
was
good.
fascinated with what the production would have cost for both of these. Pearl Harbor in itself looks like it cost, I mean, it looks like Michael Bay might have had to sell his soul to the devil to make that movie.
I mean,
uh, yeah, and then Pearl Harbor, or Tora Tora Tora, while not as obviously visually spectacular as Pearl Harbor,
Mhm.
still for the time in 1972 when this came out,
Mhm.
um, quite amazing what they were able to actually get.
Oh yeah, and also you got to remember, a lot of that budget was run up by Kurosawa while he was doing all that pre-production, all that shooting, all that stuff. So you got to think like both these movies had a bunch of money behind them to get
Yeah.
made. But yeah.
Yeah, and it would really make me wonder. I would really love to see some sort of. It's almost odd to me how much I'm interested in the making of these two movies, production wise, like set design wise. Like, were there certain things where, like, in my mind, maybe Michael Bay was able to take just like commuter planes and things and outfit them with the outer shell of a sort of American Mustang or a Japanese Zero,
Hmm.
and then that's how he was able to destroy them. Or maybe in that, because obviously that's one of the reasons in Tora 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 they couldn't destroy any of the planes because they were
Yeah.
all antiques and probably still here in some capacity in the world, which is fascinating to think about that you could go see that somewhere, kind of
Yeah.
like the DeLorean.
Honestly,
Um,
if you drive up, if you go up to Fresno from LA, it's like, I think it's right past the Grapevine. It's a it's like a military aircraft museum, and you can see all like B2 bombers, Japanese Zeros, American dogfighting planes stuff. I think it goes all the way back to like World War I. He has a couple of active duty World War I planes that were like decommissioned, but I've
yeah,
seen it when
that
I've
would
driven
be
by.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Granted, there's
we have
also a
a
place in
an
Arizona you can
aircraft
shoot
museum.
tanks, so you know.
Wait, which what the Arizona had what?
I got you on that one. So there's a place in Arizona, and there's this gentleman who, fun fact, in America, you can own tanks like you can own them and drive them around. They are completely legal for you to own and operate. The issue is they can't be loaded if you're driving them, and the turret can't move if you're driving them locally. But if you're on your own property, you can fire them and use them to your own discretion. And there's a guy in Arizona, I think he owns like 40 tanks, and you can pay to go shoot tanks out in like the middle of the desert and like
That's
blow
dope.
up like stuff. Go America. There you go.
Yep, there are certain things that you can only have in a lawless country that are then made lawful here.
There you go.
Yeah.
But back to the fun movie here. So,
Yeah.
you know.
I mean, so then obviously then Tora being a much more, I'm sure people, it was made because people probably respected the history a little bit more in that era. It was a fairly recent event. I mean, at that point, it's probably as far away now. It was as far away then as like even just like us storming Kuwait it was now. And
Something like that, because this happened in Pearl Harbor happened in 41, if I'm not mistaken. And this
about
is
a 30-year difference from the movie.
yeah, and if we're doing the whole thing, U.S. got involved in. Actually, yeah, that is almost an exact year-to-year difference.
Yeah, which is interesting to think about because we're still dealing with all that mess.
Yep.
But I mean, go figure. There's probably a lot of more devastating reasons why we can't just get it out of the way in 5 years. But that's neither here nor there. So that was fascinating about Tora, the history of it, and then how that kind of pans out with them trying to make the story smaller. Because we even had certain appearances, as like the black naval officer who was on the machine gun, obviously then shows up as Cuba Gooding Jr. and in the very,
and
which I know is probably not quite historically accurate, but
oddly enough, that is absolutely historically accurate.
okay.
That man's name was Dory Miller. He
Right.
was a cook on the USS Arizona, or maybe not the Arizona. He was a cook on that Navy ship. And during the attack on Pearl Harbor, he got into his captain's, like the captain's brig, got his captain who was injured, carried him to safety, with the other like Navy officers who were there, carried another like 10 men like to safety, got on the machine gun, which he was not trained to use, and shot down bombers as they were coming into to the ship. He is actually responsible for saving an entire Navy ship, and his job was a cook. He was awarded the Navy Cross, which is only beaten. There's only one medal in the entire United States military that beats the Navy Cross, and that is the Medal of Honor. He was up for a Medal of Honor for his role. And fun fact, he actually lived through Pearl Harbor, which most people who get those kind of awards don't live through those kind of things. Guy was an actual badass.
As we can quote from one of the movies, they're the kinds of medals you get that are sent home to your relatives or something like that. Whatever stupid line Ben Affleck said.
Well, yeah. This is the part of the podcast where I get to use my history buff self because I fucking love history. So
well, and it's your time to shine. I mean, I think they made a note at the end of the movie that Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character was like the first African American to receive such an honor.
Yes, he was the first African American to receive a medal of that high a caliber. Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, that's a good jumping off point because that actually brings me from Tora to Pearl Harbor with the whole, the elephant in the room that it is a love story, not really a Pearl Harbor movie.
It's also 3 hours long.
Right, and Cuba Gooding Jr.'s story is kind of a good example of why that movie has so many problems story-wise.
Mm-hmm.
You take the love story, which is good. I'm not going to say it's a bad love story. It's actually, I think, a very good sort of World War II classic love story, if you want to label it that.
It's melodrama, which there's nothing wrong with melodrama. I mean, the highest grossing movie at that point was Titanic, and that was a melodrama.
Exactly, and especially, I mean, just describing the bare bones of the melodrama, how dramatic is it when your best friend dies at war and you sleep with this girl and then he comes back from the dead? I mean,
And you're
Come
just
on.
like, bruh, I'm sorry I got your girl pregnant while you were dead. My
Yeah, just
bad.
no butters. It's like, come on now. And you take that and you try and stick the event inside of it, which there's a lot of setup in there that I don't think needs necessarily to be there um, for the Pearl Harbor thing, but it does need to be there for the love story. And that's kind of, I think, really where the two paths start to cross is that Michael Bay's trying to make this one movie for the first half, and it's good. And then we remember we're there at Pearl Harbor, and we're like, oh, well,
This
I guess
isn't.
we have to do
Yeah.
that now.
It's so weird how that movie is structured
Yeah.
because I made this comparison before and I'll make it again. This feels like Titanic, but instead of the boat sinking, it's Pearl Harbor.
Yeah, and even then, it's like Titanic has like this, how would I put it? Kind of this like late 30s maybe or 40s, I don't know quite the era, but like kind of a golden era Hollywood epic quality to it, where yeah, we're focused in on this very small story, but it at the same time, because the event is so slow, it's like it's needed in order to really ramp up the drama of the event. But
It's interesting. Or, sorry,
yeah,
you finish your thought.
well, Pearl Harbor is like not that. Aside, because basically, think about what the events of Titanic are: crash into the iceberg, boat starts sinking, boat breaks in half, boat sinks. You got four pretty much interesting beats.
And
Other than
all
that,
those
it's just a
happen
lot
in
of
like 10 minutes.
yeah, and it's like it's a lot of slow. Other than that, Pearl Harbor is explosions and death and destruction, which is cinematically just about the best thing you could put on screen. But it's
It's the
also
bread
paired
and
then
butter of every action movie you've ever seen, people.
exactly, and it's paired then with like an hour and a half of setup. And by the time we get to Pearl Harbor, because I was watching the time code while I was doing this, and I was like, okay, if they ended the movie after everything had ended, the movie would have been like 2 hours 15, 2 hours 20 long, and that's honestly pretty good. It's like it's just a little long enough for it had everything to have happened, and then maybe there could be one final beat where it's like the friends finally be like, we got to put aside our differences because there's something bigger than us now. But of course, then we have to have this whole final bit, which is another, like, from that point, 50 to 40 minutes of shtick. And it's like, it got me thinking that by the final half hour of the movie, I was like, this could have just been like a fucking miniseries. Like, it could have been a 6 or 7 episode miniseries.
Actually, if you're being honest, yeah, I see exactly where you're coming from with Pearl Harbor because the actual event, the attack on Pearl Harbor, like you would think that's like the climax of the movie, right? Like that's the third act, everything happens and the movie ends right after the event. And it's like a beat after where it's like the two of them are there and they're like, "Oh no, like our country's been hit," and maybe they learn the airs otherwise or something like that.
Yeah,
But it's the midway point. The attack on
pretty
Pearl Harbor
much.
is basically the midpoint of the movie. And I'm like, I don't like I'm I'm sorry, honey. You've I came, but you're not getting anything else out of the snake here. You can't keep going anymore.
Yeah, because obviously what we're talking about for the next, again, 40 to 50 minutes is the B 52 sequence, where they're trying to get these B 52s to go off of, like, it's like a quarter-mile long or less runway on an aircraft carrier, which had apparently never been done before at that point. And you can see why. I mean, those things are heavy and they got to strip them down to basically bare bones and broomsticks.
Mm.
Um, and sure, it makes for another interesting point. It on its own, it's a pretty interesting story. The love story then kind of fades into the background for most of that. It's like not even B, it's not even C. It's like it feels like a D story at that point.
After the attack on Pearl Harbor, the love story is like, yeah, you're not important anymore. We're dealing with explosions now. We're
Yeah,
doing a
and
thing.
it does feel a little bit like, well, we can't really go back to that, which kind of begs the question why one would even think that would work in pre-production, but we're not going to go there. Yeah, it was, it was interesting because like I said, I was thinking that this really could have been a a mini series if you just segment it out by a half hour, including then like an intro and a credit sequence. Episodes are probably running you 30-40 minutes long,
It,
and especially because there's a director's cut to this, by the way, which has extended scenes and 3 additional scenes.
fun fact about that director's cut, I looked it up. You know how much longer it is than the standard version?
Enlighten us.
It is 1 minute longer.
You've got to be kidding me.
I'm not even joking. I looked it up. The standard version of Pearl Harbor you would get in a store or seen in a theater is 3 hours and 4 minutes. The director's cut is 3 hours and like 5 minutes. It's
what
like
did
a
he
minute
feel the
extra
need
long.
to include?
3 additional scenes. Basically, so 54 things changed, and it included him like pulling out a bunch of shit and restructuring a bunch of shit. So it from what it sounds like, it's like almost a whole different movie. Yeah,
Okay.
a couple of things get a little bit longer, a couple of shots are a little bit longer, and a couple of things have a little bit more explosions.
Yeah, I think we're looking at the same thing here. I see what you mean. A minute and 9 seconds longer. I'm looking at some of the breakdowns for like what the director's cut has different, and he literally extends things by like 3 frames.
Yeah, like it is negligible the director's cut difference. Some of it is like he's literally changing things where it's like, "Oh, this explosion wasn't gory enough, so I just re-added the CGI." Or instead of like cutting out that explosion, I cut in more explosion. But yeah, there so that but I get your point because so this is kind of on a little bit of a tangent. You seen Martin Scorsese's The Irishman?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's on Netflix. It's like 4 hours long, right? And
Right.
people were saying it's like this should have been segmented out in like an episode block, which people did do. Like it's like they have it on Netflix. You can either watch it in one sitting or you can watch it in like 3 episode blocks or 2 episode blocks or whatever. That's what this feels like. It feels like the movie should be like 3 1-hour episodes where it's like the first episode ends when we see the planes coming over the horizon, and the second episode starts with the attack of Pearl Harbor and the aftermath, and the third episode is them attacking back and the fallout. It feels like this could be really easily structured into like a 3 episode like series on like HBO or something. But
Yeah.
that's we say that and then we think of Tora, and that's 2.5 hours long, and it had an intermission.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed that aspect of it. 'Cause one of my favorite parts about that film is the soundtrack.
Yeah.
I absolutely love the soundtrack to that movie. It's very while Pearl Harbor has like that late, like I think I've mentioned this before. The late '90s has this weird orchestral movement where like the all of the orchestral music used in movies can generally sound the same, or at least composed by the same guy, because it's all very full. It's all very flowing in its climax. It's very reminiscent of like American nostalgia almost.
It's one of
And
those things where it's almost a paint by numbers orchestra beat.
yeah, a little bit. And this movie has kind of that where it's very good. It's I'm not gonna lie that I like it. It's just that Tora's even for its time in 1972 has this tension to it that I really enjoy. And it does obviously. Then the other nice thing about Tora is that it comes from the Japanese perspective as well, and that is included into the soundtrack. Whereas Pearl Harbor is pretty much the same. The entire 3 hours, you get the same music over and over and over.
Yeah, and I know we're kind of talking crap about Pearl Harbor. Don't worry, Tor is going to get its due in a second. But overall, I think Pearl Harbor still works, except like there's some I think the biggest negative Pearl Harbor has is that you feel the length of the movie. And I think
Yeah,
that's the only bad thing I can think about it, because I think everybody else does fine. I mean, Ben Affleck's Tennessee accent is a little laughable at
no, it's
points.
not. It's not great. It's you could tell he's not from Tennessee. He doesn't
I
even look like he's from Tennessee, frankly.
honestly, Josh Hartnett, I think he just stopped doing the accent halfway through the movie. Like, I'm not even joking.
Yeah, he might have.
I don't even remember, to be honest, but I think he just stopped using the accent halfway through. If you like Titanic, you're gonna like Pearl Harbor. I'll probably just put it like that because they feel like the same movie with different historical events behind them.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's agreeable.
but yeah, but then we have Tora Tora Tora, and if I wanted to talk some shit about Tora Tora Tora, I think I could talk some shit about Tora Tora Tora. But David, do you have anything you want to point out?
To talk shit about it?
I don't know. Maybe something you thought that didn't work in Tora Tora Tora.
Okay, well, yeah. Well, part of me enjoys it. Another part of me doesn't like the political aspect of the movie. It's very dry, in a sense.
Mm.
Maybe aside from a few sequences that are actually pretty good. One of my favorites being when that captain has to drive from the White House to the senator's house or whatever it is. I can't even mention a character by name for the very reason I'm about to say. But, when he's in the car with his wife and he's like, "Dear, shut up and drive," which feels like a Michael Bay line. It feels like it should have been in Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Um, or with the hot dog and the Coke. It's like that felt very. For some reason, it felt noir to me, which I very enjoyed. But at the same time, don't know any of the characters' names. Don't know barely. I knew I could recognize our three main huge actors,
Yeah.
which we have the old man from Shawshank Redemption,
Yeah. Yeah. We have Brooks.
who plays the aircraft carrier captain.
I do know we have a returning actor from Psycho. The
That's
gentleman who
true,
played Abergast. He returns in this film.
right? The
10 years
detective.
removed from Psycho.
Yes, and he was in, if I'm not mistaken, wasn't he in 12 Angry Men, or was it
I
the other man?
believe he was also in 12 Angry Men, yes.
Yeah. So some classic actors here. But at the same time, like I said, I can't remember anybody's names because there's good characters. It's just there's so many of them, and I can't. The film doesn't choose to really follow any one in particular, and that's the part where I had a hard time with it. And I've seen this movie a few times as well as Pearl Harbor, so I recognize it this time around. But I'm sure it's fairly hard for somebody watching it the first time around to follow.
Showing up here is the gentleman who, this is his first time seeing either of these films.
Yeah.
And Tora Tora Tora, that was my biggest issue with this movie. I could not tell you who anyone's name was. I couldn't tell you what was going on for like half the movie. I mean, I knew where it's like, oh, okay, so this is setting up. It's like, oh, why were the Japanese able to attack Pearl Harbor basically out of nowhere? And it sets up every little scene where it's like, oh, they weren't 100% on this. They half-assed this to like explain away certain like misgivings. And it gets to Pearl Harbor and like it got to the attacks and I was almost like, okay, I'm done. It got me to the point where we got to the attacks on Pearl Harbor and I was like, if there is a single scene after this, I am done. I don't know anyone's name. I can barely remember like how some scenes broke down, but like god damn it, the actors worked their asses off. I mean, I was engaged for the scenes. I couldn't tell you what was going on in them. The movie was just weird. It's like it's an ensemble piece, but like I really wanted a main character to follow, which I guess that's the problem with reenactments. There's no main character in real life.
Yeah, at least like a group of them, and I think it had the opportunity to. I certainly think that the admiral played by the man. I should pull up my cast here in order to reference this. Martin Balsam, who's Admiral Husband.
Mm.
Um, he could have been a good main character in my mind, or at least one of the main maybe antagonists too. Because the whole point of this movie, that's kind of different from Pearl Harbor, is this really highlights the naivete of the American administration in anticipating the attack.
Mm.
Whereas Pearl Harbor, it's completely a surprise attack, which we know historically not to be true now. I mean, even back in 1972, they knew that we, to some capacity, knew we're just not at least taking seriously the information that would lead us to believe that it was going to happen.
Yeah, it was one of those things where the US government was aware that an attack could happen. They were just not aware that it was going to happen. Like they
Right.
got like FDR had gotten information from his officers, said that Pearl Harbor looks weak to an airstrike. If the Japanese were to try an attack, they could, and we wouldn't be able to stop them. And FDR
Right.
was like, "There's no way they're gonna do that. They're not gonna come after us." And then they did. Basically, he called their bluff, and they weren't bluffing.
Yeah. And so that was as well, like Jason Robards' Deep Throat, by the way, from All the President's Men.
Which is a movie I can't wait for us to watch here.
Exactly. And he was a pretty he I guess wasn't so much the main character, but he's kind of one of these characters that we by the end of the film are like, well, pie's on your face, buddy. uh
Yeah, kind of punted this one.
yeah, there's a few characters in the Japanese half of the film that are also very enjoyable to watch on that side. um there's a few, and a few interesting ones, by the way. The American diplomat from Japan,
Yes.
I thought that was a very fascinating character. I mean, that was a guy who, behind enemy lines, so to speak, without even realizing it. That's
Mhm.
very dramatic. I like that. Um,
He's he's an enemy agent, but he is completely unaware of what he's actually doing. It's really interesting. Also, I noticed this, and I was wondering if it was just me seeing stuff, or it was like the director's thing. So the Japanese sequences of the film look very good. It looks like
yeah,
the production's on point. Everybody's doing working their asses off, and all the production design looks legit. And then you have the American sequences, and I don't want to say they look cheap, but like some of the sets look kind of cheap.
there's a noticeable stylistic difference. Yeah. The Japanese sequences, what got from me is like a lot of the composition and structuring of those scenes was a lot better in my mind.
Mm.
Uh, so specifically, direction was what I thought was better. In the American ones, the cheapness definitely was what showed. It felt like some of the sets were a little bit too television like.
That's
Um,
actually a good point. A few of the sets looked like they were from like a TV show, and I was wondering if they shot this because they had to shot a lot of this on a soundstage in for the American sequences, but it looks like for the Japanese one they shot it like in a battleship.
yeah, and or at least I know for one in particular Japanese sequence when they're up on the bridge, that was a soundstage, and it's quite noticeable. It's one of the last shots in the film when the ship is like turning away.
Yeah.
It was like, okay, that was a little, you kind of showing your hand there. But this is actually one of the things that I was interested by when you just said this. Is Pearl Harbor obviously is done on location, but Tora, aside from like the actual Pearl Harbor attack, isn't done on location.
Mm-hmm.
Why? I don't know, because they totally could have done something with that. Even, well, I guess when you think about it too, they didn't have to do everything on location in Pearl Harbor. They could have done certain things in like Naval Row, where all like the administrative buildings are, on a stage or a lot in California, which I'm sure they probably did in order to save some money on this film. I mean, if you're, because I don't know what the budget of 25 million would be in 1972, but I don't know if it's like comparable at all to $100 million.
So it might be, to be honest. It's really weird when we think about that stuff, because like Tora, it looks expensive for like a film from like the early 1970s. It looks like one of those like big budget blockbuster films from like the 1970s. Like it looks like it looks like it cost probably roughly the same as like a Star Wars did, maybe more.
Yeah, and a film that comes to mind, a war film in particular, that comes to mind when thinking about the opportunity to get some more realistic looking things is MASH.
Mm.
And it's one of those things where it's like MASH, the movie specifically, though you could lump the TV show into this because I know that was also particularly done in similar locations. It increases like the immersiveness of that type of thing when the location is similar to what we're supposed to be doing, but not in like a produced way. Like you're out there in tents, like they were shooting that movie in that television show, versus yeah, like in the offices and things. There's only one sequence, like I said, the nighttime driving sequence, that really felt like it could have been done in Washington D.C. And other than that, it was then the cinematic immersiveness was kind of broken by this like, oh, I know that's just like a soap opera set. Honestly,
Yeah.
that's all it looks like. Um,
It's kind of weird though, right? Like, so Pearl Harbor works a lot better on like immersing you, just because it never breaks its shtick. Like like it looks consistent throughout it. And Tora, its immersion gets broken when it has to switch back to the American stuff.
yeah,
And it's like fascinating how the film goes from these super high moments to these super like, I guess not low or mediocre, just like middling kind of design and stuff like that. And then it's like the only saving grace is that the American actors are very good, and they're it's kind of like the Shatner school of acting, where if I overact or I act hard enough, the people won't notice how cheap the sets look.
yeah, yeah.
Like,
I'd agree with that. And then again, that might also be a particular guilt for Pearl Harbor. But I do think that there's a few things I want to address about Tora, and then a lot more we still need to address about Pearl Harbor.
absolutely, come on, we're
That we will
we're
get
pretty
to
loose.
right after
This or this?
that.
Damn.
Dean, I found a great way for us to do something cool and to make a little money on the side.
Ah, great. I've been looking for a new place to put my money. What do you got?
No investment needed. In fact, it's super easy, and there's creation tools we can use to record our podcast right from the phone or computer.
Wait, why would you record a podcast on your phone? You want? No, never mind. Where do I put my money for this?
I don't need any of your money. We can even get our podcast distributed to big streaming platforms like Spotify and Google Podcasts.
Oh, I get it now. We're talking big business here. Okay, so you're gonna need a lot of money from me. How much money are we talking here?
No, definitely don't need any of your money. In fact, we can make money from the podcast with no minimum listenership.
Okay, now I think I'm getting what you're going at here. We need to spend money to make money, so we're talking some big gains here. Big gains.
No, definitely no. I don't need any of your money. Just all we need to make a podcast right in one place.
Okay. So what you're telling me is that you're gonna need a pretty big check from me for this podcast. So do I just make it out to cash? Because it's no problem for me. I'll just write it up right now.
No, listen, Dean, just head over to anchor.fm and check it out. You'll see why Anchor is the best place for us to record, edit, and distribute our podcasts. And I definitely do not need any of your money.
Shut up and take my money. And we're back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Double Feature podcast, Pearl Harbor, Tora. David, you had something just right on the tip of your tongue, you were about to say before we break. What was it?
Well, it's kind of the banana peel in the middle of all this military destruction. Did you notice at all that there was a lot of like humor in Tora? Like not a lot as in quantity, but like in these spots, it's just there would be these jokes slipped in where I'm like, it feels like a little bit of a shtick joke, not like a natural let's break up the tone joke.
Honestly, yeah, I think both of these movies try to slip in like humor in places. I think Tor, it tried to do it because actually I don't know it because Tor does have a lot of one-liners, gags, kind of like you said, shtick kind of jokes where it's
Yeah.
like, oh, we have this actor, he's funny for this thing, we're gonna have him do this thing in this part, and it doesn't feel that organic. But then you have the love story meeting at the nurses station in Pearl Harbor, where that is almost a Three Stooges gag.
A little bit, but it also kind of serves the story. And I think that's really where the two separate is that gag, while funny because Ben Affleck is drugged basically by a vaccine, which really doesn't make a whole lot of scientific sense now that I think about it. But
Yeah, I think it's the thing they injected him with too much shit, or they injected him with the wrong shit. I don't know.
something. But then I also don't know why that would make you pass out immediately.
Mm.
But that's neither here nor there. It kind of sets up the whole like bashful love story. So in my mind, it's like, oh, it's not really funny for opportunistic sake. There's specific moments in Tora that I guess I mean, because there's things like the dear shut up and drive. That's kind of funny because it's like it really gets across the tone, but at the same time, it's kind of a funny line in the moment.
Mm.
There's kind of some funny things in the Japanese side too, like some of the pilots playing around with each other. Um, but there's a moment specifically at the beginning of the Pearl Harbor attack when the marching band is playing.
And they just speed up the national anthem.
Yeah, and then they run away once it's done. It's like that was way beyond the tone of what the film should have been, but it's also one of my favorite moments.
I was wondering what the hell was going on there. I
Yeah.
was like, this is something from like the Animaniacs, where it's like, oh no, the train's coming. Hurry, we gotta finish the song, guys. Da, 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 da. Okay, go. And then like try and shut it out as the train hits them. But it's really weird. I I noticed that gag, and yeah, it's funny. I think it works, but it's like it's kind of like cartoon humor.
It is. It's very cartoonish, and I've never understood it to this day. I noticed it the first time I watched this film in a history class in high school, and I've remembered it because it's so out of place. But I love. It's just the one thing that I cling on to every time I watch this movie, um, and I don't know why that is. I don't know why I let it slip because it should be a sin, but it's not. It's
I mean, it's something.
yeah.
It
I don't know. Maybe it's like we've got to have like these Hall of Fame moments on this podcast for like these moments in
it
television or film that we watch and that really don't belong, but we love them anyway.
I mean, like that moment would probably go in there, but it's so weird because these movies both have a sense of humor to them,
Yeah,
but
I,
it's
I think, but it's the Pearl Harbor aspect of that though is still that it's like too cutesy at the end of the day.
Mhm.
There's certain thing, or they're trying too hard to cling onto a tone, because obviously one of the characters in Pearl Harbor that is supposed to be like quote unquote funny, but kind of also is there for story's sake, is our stuttering friend,
Oh,
Winkle.
and he's trying to and he's stuttering super hard. So he's trying to yell at his friends to say that the Japanese are attacking, and you're just like, oh, come on, spit it out. And then, oh, the destruction of their entire like Air Force base.
Yeah, that's fun.
Yeah. Also, I just remembered we have also another returning actor on the show. We have Michael Shannon, who was in Knives Out and also appeared in this film. The More You Know.
Oh yeah, I that was another one I forgot about, but Notice definitely. Yeah, it really feels. It almost feels like, you know what I was thinking about, because there are a lot of like younger white actors who would grow up to be a little bit more dramatic in their careers.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Ben Affleck isn't necessarily under that umbrella, but
He became a pretty decent director.
it almost feels like John C. Reilly should have been in some part of this film because of like his dramatic run that he never ended up really clinging on to. Because if we remember, John C. Reilly has been in things like, I don't know,
Boogie Nights.
Boogie Nights. Yeah, that's one. There's another war film that I know he's in.
King Kong, or Kong,
No.
King of Skull Island.
No.
Are you sure? He's great in that movie.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen it, but no, there's something that there's a war movie. It's on the tip of my tongue.
That John C. Reilly is in?
Yeah. Hold on.
I'm going
Casualties
through
of
my Rolodex.
War. That's what he's in.
Huh.
Yeah. He has some weird credits under his he's also in Thin Red Line. That's what it is. That's probably what I was actually thinking of. But he has some weird credits. But this felt like one of the kind of film that he should have been in at that point in his career, and it certainly feels like the type of casting they were trying to do by just getting these like random young white guys to be like, "You're all stars in your own right, but play a side character in this movie."
Yep. Well, I mean, all those guys got taken up because of a television series that came out around the same time that we were talking about during the break.
Yeah.
Which would be
Band of Brothers. It was gonna.
Yep.
I was telling Dean that this was that was what reminded me of why Pearl Harbor should have been a short series instead of a movie. Which also, again, a star-studded cast. Obviously, a little bit more fleshed out than this, and obviously not so focused on, you know,
a love story between Ben Affleck
in particular.
And yeah,
but
it's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know exactly where I would segue to from there, other than the immediate thing I think about is I want to specifically focus on Michael Bay at this point, because we've kind of danced around picking and poking fun at him. But looking back at him from the future as to this point in his career, obviously before he had done things like Transformers,
Yeah,
and a few other notable titles. But I am not a big Michael Bay expert.
Mm.
What are some titles before Pearl Harbor that would have earned him
this
film?
much money?
Yeah,
because let's be honest,
this could have been reserved for somebody like a Steven Spielberg, but then Michael Bay, though perfectly, gets the job for this, and I'm fascinated to know how that could have possibly happened.
Well, okay, I'm going to start off with this. So, for those who don't know, Michael Bay got his start in the early 90s doing music videos. That was his thing. He did music videos for like a solid decade.
Yeah.
But the thing that actually got him his directorial shtick would be, we have The Rock and Bad Boys, if you're wondering. We also have Armageddon. So those are the three like movies that came out before Pearl Harbor. It was the first Bad Boys film, which big action movie, explosions, financial success. The Rock, Nicolas Cage, and Sean Connery on Alcatraz, being like special ops, explosions, cool stuff. Come on. Armageddon, explosions in space with Bruce Willis. There you go. And then we have Pearl Harbor. And then you know what he follows up? You know what he follows Pearl Harbor up with?
It's a good question. I'm actually trying to flip through it right now and find it, but
I'll let you know. It's Bad Boys 2. Arguably one of the greatest action films of all time. Bad Boys 2. Yeah. And then, he has like that's after Bad Boys 2, that's when his films take the deep dive into really bad and like kind of like they're completely mediocre across the board. It's like the Island like the Transformers movies.
Oh, the original Transformers is pretty good. The first
Uh,
one is okay.
you can believe whatever you want to believe, but that's basically what happens. So if you're wondering how Michael Bay got to this point in like his career where they were like, yeah, we can greenlight you $125 million or however much money this was, it's because he produced Bad Boys, The Rock, and Armageddon, and all of them made a shit ton of money.
Yeah, I was going to say Bad Boys and Armageddon are two classic films in the action genre that deserve. A director deserves to get a big budget after those. I mean, especially Bad Boys to trigger such an iconic property off that. Armageddon obviously is kind of more of a one-off, but
I mean, to put it to you like this, you know how much The Rock made?
no, actually, that's probably the least popular on that list.
It made
Though,
$340 million on a $75 million budget.
Yeah, exactly. With that type of return, anything can happen.
Made
I can't even
tons of money.
Because obviously Dean and I are both film hopefuls, and I can't even fathom like going from $75 million budget. It's like, wow, that's a lot of scratch to keep track of. Yeah, Michael Bay is kind of also this cocaine fueled, stone cold explosions master, but like I can't imagine taking the responsibility of $75 million and then waking up and being like, oh, you've turned that into 6 times what it was worth. Thank you. Like, I can't imagine the emotion that runs through somebody. I imagine it is probably similar to cocaine, and I feel like that's what triggers the addiction. But,
It's one of those things where people give shit to Michael Bay, notably for like good reason. The man kind of destroyed the Transformers series.
Yeah. They've made buckets upon dump truckloads of money. So
yeah, like that's one of those things where it's like, look, people, he'll stop making them when you stop giving him money. Like that, yeah. the man's not dumb.
No,
but he knows his game. He's good at explosions. He makes melodrama films, and he's kind of an auteur in that way, which is weird to say about Michael Bay.
Yeah,
but you can tell it's a Michael Bay movie. Like, everything's kind of a little oversaturated. Everything's a little bit too pretty. There's a lot of explosions. I think every movie we've mentioned has a giant explosion at some point.
Yeah, it's kind of like the similar argument maybe would be, is Spielberg an auteur? I mean, Spielberg pretty much exclusively does blockbuster type movies, but you can definitely tell when you're watching a Spielberg movie. So, like, but yeah, Bay has I could particularly tell this was a Bay film when between explosions I get shots of the American flag floating in the water.
Yeah, that was pretty Michael Bay-esque.
Because this is the other thing that I noticed particularly is, I don't know, I never checked, but I know this was something I wanted to check on. The release date of this film was May 25th, so this is pre 9/11 technically.
Yeah, actually, this was a pre 9/11 film, which for people who might not understand this in terms of moviedom, so 9/11 is probably one of the most important things to happen for like our generation of people.
Yeah.
And in the film culture, there are films that came out leading up to 9/11 and films that came out after 9/11. Like the Spider-Man films came out after 9/11 and they made all the money and they changed like the cultural landscape of films after that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of interesting in that way where it's like this film feels like if it got released right after, do you think it would have been as successful?
Yeah. Well, that's what I've been kind of racking my brain over is this feels like it should have come out after 9/11, right? The tone of this movie is extremely patriotic. Tora
Yeah.
Tora Tora is fairly historical,
Mhm.
and even at times critical of American politics and oh well American history. Pearl Harbor is the exact opposite. It's completely American. It's completely about glorifying everything that went into this war.
Mhm.
Where Tora 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 is strictly about politics, America Pearl Harbor is strictly about the greatest generation, quote unquote.
Yeah.
And it fascinates me that in when this movie probably started production, which had to have been 1999 or 2000,
Mhm.
uh, versus then even further back when you start having the talks about these films in 1998 or so. You know, how do you just feel like that's gonna? Because I feel like late 90s America wasn't so into patriotism before 9/11. Whereas then afterward, and this is I guess the point I'm trying to make, after 9/11, patriotism went up like tenfold. Like that's when
Yeah.
you start to get things like Black Hawk Down and other movies where it's like it's strictly about glorifying American military, American military, American
Well,
military, so that you get
Band
people
of
in.
Brothers.
Yeah,
Like Band of Brothers came out. I believe you said that show came out right after 9/11. Which, by the way, a show with that much clout behind it, it was a pure accident. It came out after it, but that show made all the money, and it was produced by Steven Spielberg. That
yeah,
that show was a cultural touchstone, like in the early 2000s. Like everything, like if you could slap an American flag on something post, 9/11, people just ate that up.
yeah.
Which, yeah,
I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like it maybe it's just also that it's perfectly timed because it's theatrical run where it's definitely over by that point.
yeah.
And even come award season, still didn't get that big of a turnout. I mean, I think ended up winning best sound editing, if I'm correct.
Um, I guess I think war films basically have sound editing on lock. If you ever get a big budget war film, usually their sound editing is on lock.
Yeah, it's never. I think the only recent war film at that point that had gotten anything significant was Private Ryan got best cinematography. But then this Pearl Harbor, it got best sound editing, which is like big whoop, and
Mm.
then ended up getting like a Teen Choice Award, which is like that's high
Not
praise.
exactly what you want, you know.
No, I'm sure Ben Affleck didn't really give a shit about getting that surfboard.
Yeah,
Um,
I think Michael Bay was like, I'd really like an Oscar, just one,
but
just
there
one.
are obviously reasons this movie doesn't deserve an Oscar.
Lots of them, yes. It's 3 hours long, guys.
Yeah,
Jeez.
a whole section of movie where finally, oh fuck, what's his name? Got too many tabs open right
Josh
now.
Hartnett.
No, a whole section of movie where finally Alec Baldwin's character makes an appearance and actually matters to the story.
And that's the crazy thing. Alec Baldwin's his character's a real dude.
Yeah, and is actually not a bad character. I
Yeah.
like it. It's just he's gone for most of the movie.
It's fun. It's fun. But I guess that kind of brings us to maybe the wrapping up phase. Let's figure out this. Was this a good pairing? Is this a good pairing of movies? And
Yeah,
why? Okay, good
yeah.
pairing. Why do these pair well together? Because there's the
Uh,
obvious point where it's like, well, they're the only two Pearl Harbor films. But why do you think these movies stick out? Because there are other Pearl Harbor films.
yeah, I think both of these movies kind of have what the other lacks. Where Tora has a little bit more of the tension and um, kind of there's almost a Game of Thrones esque character web to it.
Mm-hmm.
Pearl Harbor then gains back in, although this is ironic to say, clarity and American patriotism, which
Mm-hmm.
is not what I'm watching Pearl Harbor for. What I'm really watching Pearl Harbor for is,
That
you know,
45 minutes of unbroken explosions.
well, the love story. I guess you could, if you wanted to make it innocent. What I'm really watching
Well,
it for
yeah.
is, yeah, Kate Beckinsale's the best part of the movie.
David's over here being like, Kate Beckinsale, give me a call. It's fine.
Well, yeah, if you're into Pete Davidson, uh, or that's really the best part of the movie is like the kind of the sheen it has, the film of like young and American in 1941. What a time it must have been. But I think both of those films could have used that in the other one. It's like, yeah, uh, Tora 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 is particularly dry, whereas Pearl Harbor also lacks a lot of tension other than the very obvious physical tension of the Pearl Harbor sequence.
It's one of those things where it's like Tora has depth upon depth upon depth of like characters, interactions, what's going on, the behind the scenes stuff, but it's very dry. Whereas Pearl Harbor, everything's pretty surface level. What you're seeing is what you're getting, but it's like it's interesting, but there's not a lot more to like chew on.
Yeah, yeah,
And it's interesting because there's also the other thing where as Tora is more, I don't know if historically accurate is the word, but it's a lot more detail oriented, whereas Pearl Harbor's a lot more spectacle driven.
right. And while both films kind of get there's similarities in that whole attack sequence. They're focused on the ships first, then the hangars. They both make note of the third wave. There's all those beats in there that are similar. Um, I particularly end up being a fan more of Pearl Harbor's, actual attack sequence because, yeah, it's visually a lot more impactful, and
There's also the
particularly,
horrors of war are more up front in Pearl Harbor
I
as
don't think they
opposed to
shy away
Tora.
from it in Tora Tora Tora. It's that while I'm impressed what they were able to do in 1970, it's still just not enough to really like the amount of people that end up being actors in extras and all these things that are in the Pearl Harbor sequences is it looks astronomical on screen. It looks like it's a populated area, but in Tora Tora Tora, yeah, you can kind of tell because it's just about 50 people in one area at a time.
Mm.
Um, and that's certainly one way that it thins out in one versus the other. Um, but even still, it's like I think that's why you watch both of these movies together. Is that you watch both of them because both of them are good. It's just they need the complement of each other in order for you to really enjoy the end of the day.
And I think that's what makes a good double feature. And I guess that's gonna kind of help us with our thesis. So for those who are not aware of our new direction for the podcast, we're trying to find the perfect pairing of film, right? And my thesis is for the pairing of these movies, they have to complement each other's. One has a weakness, the other has a strength in the corresponding so forth. So it makes a very enjoyable, good movie watching experience. And I think these do it. Right? Like there's both of them have their weaknesses because there's flaws in every film, but the other one kind of compensates for it.
Yeah, I think the thing I think about too in our search is what I really want to find is a film that you start with that just gets you in the mood, and then the second film is the finishing move, right? And
The build up, the payoff, the climax.
what's interesting is I watched Pearl Harbor and then Tora Tora Tora.
Mm.
Um, Particularly Pearl Harbor, I think is the movie that should get you in the mood. I think it gets you into more of the tone of the time, and it gets you a little bit more immersed. But Tora 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 lacking that completely. It was kind of like a softer blow after the fact, so I think maybe even watching them in the opposite order would be better. But then again, Tora 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 being a dry film, I don't know that it would get you in the mood for Pearl Harbor.
It's almost there's also an issue because this is probably the biggest thing is now I love movies. Movies are great. I'll watch basically anything. but I need to use the bathroom every once in a while. And these movies are and this is 5 hours of content.
Yeah.
Well, it's 5.5 hours of content for those out there. So it's one of those things where it's like, if I was going to watch these, I'd probably watch Tora first, because it gives you a lot more of like, this is the detail, this is everything that's going on, these are all the players. And then you watch Pearl Harbor, and it's like, now this is the human aspect of it. You know, this is the humanization of, these are the people on the ground, these are the, this is the love story, this is the boats, this is the aftermath, and all this other stuff. I think that's kind of the way you want to watch it, right? Because then Tor is 2 something hours long.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately the reason I think this isn't quite the perfect double feature. I mean, the perfect double feature certainly doesn't focus on one singular event. You know, I that's the Pearl Harbor thing. Yeah, I don't think certainly our intention on the show is not to have every double feature we think is going to be the perfect. It was kind of opportunistic for the event, and I don't think that there needs to be comedy, drama. There needs to be all the perfect ingredients inside that perfect double feature. This certainly is not that. And I still even so think that because of the complementary nature of a double feature, these movies, while complementing each other in a specific narrative, don't actually complement each other just going into it. You kind of need to be prepared for both of these. Prepared, like you said, for 5.5 hours of combined cinema. And that's quite a lot to chew on. I don't know what a good runtime for a double feature would be. I think you spend a good evening on a double feature.
I think a good runtime is when you don't notice how long it is.
Yeah.
And
I would assume 4 hours long. I mean, the standard runtime of a movie twice, but I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I guess that kind of brings us to the end here. I think we're both in consensus. This is a good pairing. If you want to get if you want to get your patriotism on, if you want to get your, a little bit of history, a little bit of intrigue, a little bit of romance, little bit of comedy, a little bit of, action, this is a good place to go for your December 7th double feature.
Yeah.
This is a hit for us.
Yeah.
They got issues. We kind of talked at length about the issues, but we did talk about some of the good parts. Acting's pretty solid across the board. Some things are a little goofy. We'll give you that. The spectacle's really good. The character, like the actors, portray this stuff. The stories are intriguing enough to keep you, watching.
Yeah, and a worthwhile pairing of war movies, if that's what you're specifically going for.
Yes, but if you're more interested in war movies, check us, keep following us, because we are going to do a whole month of war movies coming up. But other than that, David, is there anything we want to plug before we wrap up everything?
No, Dean, I think we're going to be rolling to the end of the year here. It's December, early December. The sleigh bells ringing, tingling, tinging, or whatever the song is. We're going to be coming up on a lovely little Christmas month. We're going to be doing some fabulous Christmas movies across the board. Some episodes are going to be coming up where we go over the year in review, and then maybe the not so good year in review.
Everyone knows this is a brand new podcast and we're trying to get better, but yeah, we're also very well aware of the shortcomings we've had this year, and we're going to try and address them.
And the shortcomings of our picks as well. But that will all be addressed in an award-style show that we're very excited to present at the end of the year. Other than that, just keep an eye out for us for wherever you can find us. Dean, where can they find us?
You can find us on Spotify, our sponsor, Anchor FM. You can also find us on Google Podcast, and I believe you can also find us on our YouTube channel, In the Frame, where you can also find our other podcast, which is Too Obscure for TV, and some of our video essay style videos that will be coming out soon.
Right, and if you want to follow us to keep in contact with us and everything, you can find us on Instagram at
#doublefeature_podcast. That's #doublefeature_podcast. That's where you can find us. We post stuff there all the time.
Love
But
it.
yeah, we try. But yeah, and David, what are we watching next week?
Well, next week, like I said, we're going to be digging a little bit more into those Christmas films. And I think we got a really good pairing to start off with. We're going to be starting off with Lethal Weapon and Die Hard. Two Christmas movies you didn't know were Christmas movies.
The Christmas movies that make Christmas badass. That's
Yeah.
what we're getting in.
You wanted more explosions? You watch Pearl Harbor and Tora. Well, just you wait, because there's going to be random explosions in a minute.
It's going to be great.
Yeah.
But that's about it here at the Double Feature Podcast. Everybody keep watching. Year's almost over. It's getting better every day.
Yeah, the world will magically go back to the way it was on January 1st, 2021, and we, at the Double Feature Podcast, can't wait for that, and we hope to see you in the new year with us. Dean, I'll see you before the new year is over.
I'll see you too. Peace.
See ya.